Remember 2 years ago when there was a controversy involving this man right here? We all know how good Bijan Robinson is for the Atlanta Falcons. There's a reason that the Falcons drafted him high in the first round of the 2023 NFL Draft. And in his first 2 seasons in the league, he's got over 3,300 yards from scrimmage and has found the end zone 23 times, all while nabbing a Pro Bowl appearance. As of this video, you could make the legitimate argument that he is the best running back in the NFL behind Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. But during Week 7 of the 2023 season, when he was a rookie and the Falcons played the Buccaneers in an NFC South rivalry game, Robinson barely played, only recording 6 snaps. This wouldn't have been an issue by any means, especially seeing as the Falcons ended up winning the game, if it wasn't for the fact that Robinson wasn't listed on the injury report. Throughout the entire week, the Falcons were insisting that he would play and would be at full strength, only for him to barely touch the field. The NFL had a massive problem with that, and understandably so, seeing as it's unfair to the bookies, unfair to people who want to bet on the game, unfair to people who bought tickets with the expectation that a player was going to play, unfair to daily fantasy people, and unfair to the opposing team. For this, the Falcons were fined a hefty amount of money, which seems to be a common theme with Atlanta between that, the Kirk Cousins tampering issue, the Jeff Ulbrich prank call fiasco, and a whole slew of other things. Seriously, why the Falcons seem to be involved in some sort of administrative controversy once a year is baffling to me. But the NFL has shown that you have to be truthful on the injury report. Otherwise, they're going to lay the hammer down. If there's someone that's not listed on the injury report, there is an expectation that the player is going to play. If that player then does not suit up, you better have a darn good reason as to why not. Because otherwise, the NFL is going to look into it. And it's always been like this. Case in point, 1967 with the Chicago Bears, when they tried to pull a fast one with this man right here. This is Gale Sayers, and we'll talk about how good he was in just a little bit, because spoiler alert, the man is one of the greatest running backs of all time, and is an absolute legend in every sense of the word that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. So imagine if you went into a game expecting to see Gale Sayers play, and he doesn't play, and the Bears never put him on the injury report, while all of the bookies knew that he wasn't going to play and were confused as to why the Bears never listed him, because it was the worst kept secret in the world. The NFL wasn't going to look too kindly on that. I'll put it that way. They were going to raise some eyebrows. And nearly 6 decades later, it deserves a deep dive today, because this is one of the strangest controversies in the career of Gale Sayers, and one of the most bizarre cheating controversies in the over century-long history of the Chicago Bears that you probably never heard of. Because this is the story behind the time that the Bears tried to cheat the NFL. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you probably never heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that the Bears forgot to report about the bear down. Before I talk about the incident in question, what was said about it, and of course, how the actual game without Gale Sayers went, we need some context to understand just how good Gale Sayers was, and how consequential and important he was to the Bears in the first place. And as you might be able to tell from all these highlights, Gale Sayers was really freaking good at football. There's a reason that his number is retired by the Chicago Bears. There's a reason that he's in the Hall of Fame. And there's a reason that the Kansas Comet is widely considered to be one of the greatest to ever do it. He had such grace and ability in the open field and to make guys miss. And when he was on his game, few could hold a candle to him. He made opposing defenses look silly on a weekly basis. You could argue that his rookie season in 1965, where he was a Pro Bowler, an AP first-team All-Pro, scored 20 touchdowns, and had just under 1,400 yards from scrimmage in 14 games, was the greatest rookie season of all time. And honestly, I wouldn't fight you too much on that. Those 20 touchdowns, by the way, were rushing and receiving. It does even include his contributions on special teams, of which he made many. Sayers was named an AP first-team All-Pro in 5 consecutive seasons from 1965 to 1969. He led the league in rushing yards twice. He finished top 5 in the MVP voting 4 straight years on some Bears teams that were not so good, and he made it onto the All-1960s team despite only starting off his career in the second half of the decade. Despite being 5 years behind the 8 ball, he was still recognized as being that good. To think that 2 other running backs were chosen ahead of him. That 1965 draft class for the Bears, where they had 2 first-round picks and drafted Dick Butkus and Gale Sayers back-to-back, 2 Hall of Famers, was absolutely legendary, one of the greatest of all time. And I think most people would agree that Gale Sayers was the most exciting player of his era in the National Football League. There have been few players like Gale Sayers in the history of the sport. And to start off the 1967 season, he was playing pretty well, even if the Bears were not. He had a kickoff return touchdown to start the year off against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had 142 yards rushing on 6.5 yards per carry in a 14-3 win against the Detroit Lions. He averaged close to 6 yards per carry and a touchdown in a win against the Minnesota Vikings. 5 weeks into the 1967 season, and the Bears had scored just 7 touchdowns. 2 of them were pick sixes, and 1 was a fumble return. So if we take defensive touchdowns out of it, the Bears only scored 4 touchdowns on offense and special teams over the first 5 weeks of the year. Gale Sayers was responsible for all 4 of those. The fact that the Bears were still competitive is a testament to just how good Sayers was, because he was just about single-handedly carrying this team. And because of this man right here playing lights out, the Bears, despite having the literal worst offense in football at just 57 points scored through 5 games, or roughly 11 points per game, with again 3 of those touchdowns coming on defense and another one on special teams, so even worse than that offensively, were right in the thick of things. They were still very much alive. Up next for them, a critical battle on the road against the Cleveland Browns. Now, back in 1967, there were no wild cards. You had to win your division to make the playoffs. So it was first place or nothing. The Green Bay Packers were atop the Central Division with a 3-1-1 record, and they were the 2-time defending champion of the NFL. So you knew that they probably weren't going to be letting up anytime soon. The Bears were 2-3, but if you win this game and get back to 500, albeit against a very good Browns team that was 3-2 and in a 3-way tie at the moment for first place in the Century Division, alongside the St. Louis Cardinals and the New York Giants, then you're right in this thing heading into the second half of the year. And based off of everything I said about how the season had gone for Chicago, both from the positive standpoint of Gale Sayers playing well and the negative standpoint of Gale Sayers being just about the only player on the Bears offense with a pulse, as the team looked like a borderline expansion team in every other scenario on that side of the ball, the storyline for the Browns going into this game was simple. Stop Gale Sayers. You win this game if you can contain Gale Sayers, because the Bears truly have no one else. All week long, the story was the Browns' stout defense, which had won 3 straight games, had allowed just 33 points over that stretch, and had forced 9 turnovers over their last 2 games, while holding 2 of those 3 teams to 70 yards rushing or less on very few yards per carry, and how they would fare against maybe the best running back in the NFL. This man right here. It was expected to be a pretty good game if both sides were healthy. However, during this game right here, that was not the case. The Cleveland Browns dominated, winning it by a final score of 24-0. A good game, this was not. The Bears' lackluster offense faltered for yet another week, as despite the game being scoreless at the halftime break, the Browns dominated in the second half, with Gary Collins catching 2 touchdown passes from Frank Ryan, as the Browns won by 4 scores, since back in 1967, a 24-point game was 4 scores, because the 2-point conversion, while it existed in the rival and soon-to-be merging AFL, did not exist in the NFL, and wouldn't exist until the 1990s. The Bears got nothing going offensively, not just as evidenced by the 0 points that they put up, making the worst offense in football even worse from a scoring average standpoint than they were before, but by the stats as well. Sometimes the stats lie. This was not one of those games. The Bears had just 136 yards of total offense and picked up just 9 first downs. It was tied for the fewest first downs they had in a game in a losing effort since October 1st, 1950, when they had 8 first downs in a loss to the Green Bay Packers. The last time they failed to move the chains that badly, the Korean War had just started, the Baltimore Colts were still a team, as in the original Colts that came over from the AAFC and failed spectacularly and had no relation to the Baltimore Colts that existed that you probably know of before moving to Indy in the 1980s, and dirt hadn't even been moved on Disneyland yet. And the main problem for the Bears offensively on this day, seeing as there were many, had to do with their ineffective ground game. Nothing went right for Chicago. When you lose 24-0, it's tough to say that any part of their game was good. But if anything really stunk, it was their rushing attack, which had 20 yards on 22 carries, averaging less than 1 yard per carry. More specifically, the Bears averaged 0.9 yards per carry on the day. Their longest run of the day was 5 yards. Their top rusher, the late Brian Piccolo, had 11 yards. Of the 6 players to run with the ball, 3 of them averaged less than 1 yard per carry. It was that kind of day for the Bears. Especially back in the 1960s, it was almost impossible to win with a poor ground game. Teams won games by running the football and with the 3 yards and a cloud of dust strategy. When you're not getting anywhere close to 3 yards and all you're getting is a cloud of dust, with that cloud coming behind the line of scrimmage, good luck winning games. The loss dropped the Bears to 2-4, and while they weren't officially out of it, they definitely had no room for error the rest of the way if they wanted to catch up with the Packers, win the Central, and make it to the playoffs and possibly play for a trip to the Super Bowl. And as you might have been able to figure out, during that Browns game, there was one player mysteriously missing that did not get a single snap. That player, you guessed it, this man right here, the Kansas Comet himself, Gale Sayers. Sayers was not on the injury report, and if you were an unsuspecting fan, you absolutely thought he was going to play. He traveled with the team to Cleveland, for crying out loud. You had no reason not to believe that he wasn't going to suit up. Even the Browns themselves knew they had the game won when they realized that Sayers wasn't going to play, as they were shocked, because they had no inkling whatsoever of this. As 2-time Pro Bowl defensive end and future Kansas City Chiefs head coach Paul Wiggins said, it was like going to a Harry Belafonte show and Harry Belafonte wasn't there. With Sayers in there, you have to keep an eye on him all the time. You must always know where he is. You're always thinking about him. When we saw that Sayers wasn't playing, we could give both running backs equal attention. We could take the thought of Sayers out of our minds, and we just played football. Translation? Sayers is really freaking good, and can do it all in the running game and the passing game. He's everywhere. Once we knew that he wasn't playing, At first, we were shocked because we had no idea. But after that, it was game over because there was no way that the Bears were going to do anything on us. Now, Sayers said the reason he didn't play was because during the pregame warmups, he pulled something. As he said, I was just jogging along the sidelines and suddenly hurt my left leg. I thought I would have been able to play if I hadn't re-injured it. I knew I wasn't going in there after hurting it. And look, in a normal world, that'd be the end of our story. Injuries during pregame warmups, they happen. I've done a couple of videos on them before, one of which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. We even saw an incident involving the Baltimore Colts more than a decade later where one of their players got injured on the coin toss. I'm not even kidding about that. If you're not on the injury report because you're fully healthy, and then something happens in the pregame warmups that's unforeseen, and you pull something, it sucks, but that happens, and that's fine. No one's gonna bat an eye, and it's not going to be an issue going forward. However, there was just one small problem with this. Because apparently, the bookies knew that Gale Sayers wasn't going to be playing. Even though Sayers wasn't on the injury report, the bookies had a very good idea that this man right here was going to be out. Remember how Sayers said he re-injured his leg during warmups? That implies he had an injury at one point to the left leg. And apparently, that injury was so bad that bookies and other people with inside information knew that his odds of suiting up for the game against the Browns were the same as the odds of the Beatles fading to irrelevancy. 0. On Tuesday, October 17th, 5 days before the game on Sunday, October 22nd, Sayers was held out of practice, with head coach George Halas saying that he was resting, which, okay, veteran day off. That's a normal thing. But the fact that he was held out of practice for rest raised some suspicions, and some bookies and insiders headed to Wrigley Field in the coming days to watch practice unfold. It was super easy to see what was happening at Wrigley Field, even if you never got inside the stadium. There were literally 16 residential buildings next to the stadium that have rooftops where you can look and see what's happening. And back in 1967, these rooftops did not have bleachers on them. This wasn't even Spygate or illegal activity. There was nothing against going on the roof and bringing some binoculars and seeing what was happening inside Wrigley. You weren't sneaking into the venue. And during the week of practice, they noticed that Sayers, while he was out there, was seriously limping. The Bears never put him on the injury report, but the bookies knew that something was fishy after watching these practices, because they watched the workouts from many vantage points, and they knew that Sayers did not look good to go at all. He was not going to suit up. It got to a point where sportsbooks in the Midwest, starting with Chicago and then eventually in Louisville and Cleveland, took the game off of their boards because the original line of a touchdown in favor of the Browns was under the assumption that Sayers was playing. And everyone knew that if Sayers wasn't playing, that the Browns were going to blow the Bears out. So the books didn't want to get screwed. As one bookmaker said, we took the game off the boards because of Sayers' injury. We knew about it because there are no such things as secret workouts. Sayers was seen limping. So yes, Sayers was telling the truth about getting hurt during pregame warmups. But he was also really badly hurt way before that. It's almost like the kid who says he was doing great in school, but then got an F on his math test, and his grades now stink. Yes, the part where you got an F and your grades stink is true, but you conveniently forgot to mention the fact they had an F before that and had failed a bunch of other tests. In other news, what was happening with Sayers and Halas was sort of a half-truth. And things got so bad that Commissioner Pete Rozelle got involved. This was now a league-wide issue, especially seeing as there have been a couple of instances earlier in the decade of players and gambling. most notably with Paul Hornung and Alex Karras, both of whom oddly enough are now in the Hall of Fame, the NFL wasn't just going to let this slide. As Rozelle said, we are in the process now of getting more information on the situation. We get 3 or 4 reports on every game throughout the season from private sources. These might come in on Tuesday, Thursday, and shortly before the game. We look into strong fluctuations in odds, which usually indicate an injury. The fact that the Bears outright said that Sayers was going to play, and they never put him on the injury report, only for this to happen, 2 very conflicting pieces of information? Yeah, that raised some red flags around the league, especially with the bookies having information they did and acting accordingly with the game. What happens after that is a little bit hazy, because after Rozelle announced that he was getting involved and conducting an investigation, there were no stories afterwards. The story just kind of died. Maybe the Bears were punished and everything was handled internally. Maybe Rozelle found no wrongdoing and the Bears were telling the truth the entire time with Sayers, which honestly seems pretty hard to believe knowing what we knew. Maybe the Bears were just issued a stern warning saying, "We'll let you off the hook this time, but don't do it again." Maybe Pete Rozelle just didn't want to pick a fight with Papa Bear and pick a fight with, for all intents and purposes, the founding father of the NFL and the most important figure in the history of the league. You come to your own conclusions on this. Whatever the case, this massive controversy that made a ton of headlines just fizzled out and was buried, hence why you probably never heard of it until this very moment. Either way, something fishy happened based off of all the evidence and based off of everything that we know. Gale Sayers obviously had a heck of a career. Even though he didn't play for a long time due to injuries cutting his career far too short, he is still fondly remembered today as one of the greatest players in the history of the sport. And if he stayed healthy, there's a chance he could have been the greatest running back of all time. He was genuinely that good, and is on the NFL 100 team for a reason. But it's funny how one of the things he's remembered for, roughly 6 decades later, is a controversy that is not his fault whatsoever, and is not a game that he played, but rather a game that he didn't play. Blame the Bears organization, blame the rooftops at Wrigley Field, blame it on the rain, blame whatever or whoever you want. But at the end of the day, the Bears did something fishy when it came to the reporting on the injury status of this man right here. Because on October 22nd, 1967, during a game against the Cleveland Browns, Gale Sayers had as many touches as the Chicago Bears scored points. 0. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.